This is TWiT.
Meta, aka Facebook, has threatened Canada. Why I oughta. So there is a bill, C-18. We've been talking about it before. Michael Geist, who's a Canadian lawyer, talks a lot about C-18. It would make Google and Meta compensate news organizations when posts or links to their work appear on those sites. So if, Lisa, you're on Facebook and you say, oh, here's a great article about SVB, you post it there, and Meta's got to pay Semaphore for that article. Meta doesn't like that too much. A spokesperson said the company is planning to remove Canadians' access to both written and broadcast news if Bill C-18 becomes law.
Whoa. So what they're doing, in other words, if you're a Canadian who uses Facebook and you wanted to
news,
you wanted to put a link to an article, you couldn't do that anymore.
Couldn't do that. Instagram too.
How are they going to enforce that? Are they going to use geo?
I think you could put a link in, but it wouldn't get propagated.
Well, no. Like, how are they going to know that it? So the question I have is, first off, is this law only for Canadian citizens? So if you travel from Yellowknife down to Miami, are you like, all right, now is the time for me to shine, and you have and you do all your links, or are
it would just be Canada?
Well, then this is the thing: is if you're a U.S. citizen, and
it's not going to affect you, Lisa.
Well, no. I'm serious. It could though, because if you go to Vancouver and you're like,
you can't do it in Vancouver. Yeah.
Well, but I'm a U.S. citizen, so why is Meta abrogating my rights as a U.S. citizen?
You're in Canada.
And
blame Canada, baby.
And what are they going to do about VPNs? What is to stop somebody from using a VPN and saying, I'm not in Yellowknife anymore. I'm in Venice.
Elisa Laventure, a Meta spokesperson, said, if the Online News Act passes in its current form, we will end the availability of news content on Facebook and Instagram for people in Canada. A legislative framework that compels us to pay for links or content that we do not post and which are not the reason the vast majority of people use our platform. I'm getting all worked up. It's neither sustainable nor workable. That's a big threat. Remember, Google's done it, though. Didn't Google do it in
Australia?
France or Australia?
Yeah. Australia.
They threatened it in Australia. Did they actually
pull
it?
it was a whole thing.
Yeah.
I think they worked out a negotiation.
Yeah, Murdoch backed down in Australia.
But I think it winds up, if you negotiate and you wind up agreeing on fees, then it means that the biggest players wind up working out their deal, I think, right?
Yeah.
Because they get,
and the rest
they cut
of us
a deal,
get screwed.
The smaller players.
Yeah.
It's, I understand why. I mean, yeah, I love that Facebook is threatening to do something they say doesn't matter much to its users. We're going to do this thing that doesn't matter much to our users. So there, and it's like, well, it doesn't matter much to users. Then why do you care?
Right.
Why would your users?
Well, they don't want to pay. Heritage
news media,
Canadian Heritage Minister, which is, by the way, a great title. I like that. Pablo Rodriguez said, Meta's decision to pull back from news is a threat, intended to persuade the government to make changes that would reduce the amounts the tech it's a negotiation ploy. It would reduce the amounts they'd be required to pay news organizations. Rodriguez says it's disappointing to see that Facebook has resorted to threats instead of working with the Canadian government in good faith. This tactic didn't work in Australia, and it won't work here. I have to say, I'm a little bit on, I hate to admit it, I'm a little bit on Facebook's side here. It makes no sense for well, okay, so how do you feel, Reed, if Facebook put your article from Semaphore, so Lisa loves your article, posts it in her Vancouver home, or her Yellowknife home, posts it on Facebook, do you think Semaphore should get paid? Because what you're going to get is a picture, a snippet, and then a link back to Semaphore, right?
Yes.
Semaphore is going to get the traffic ultimately.
I mean, I'm sort of with you on this. I mean, I think that I worked at the information for 4 years, right? They're behind a paywall and they have no advertising, right? So if you click on that link on Facebook, you're going to hit their paywall. And, you know, that's what news organizations, if they want to have that business model, right, then they can have a paywall and it doesn't ultimately matter. But I think if you want to have the advertising business model, then you kind of want that traffic and you want to get that click through. The problem is, I think historically, like news organizations just became way too dependent on Facebook and on social media. and then it skews all the incentives, right? So I think the problem is more with I mean, I hate to say it, like more with the news business and people just, sort of optimizing these businesses for clickbait. And we've seen the trouble that's gotten us into, right, over the last 5 to 10 years. So it's a problem, I guess, that goes beyond Facebook. And I don't think you can blame Facebook for the problem. But I mean, it does make sense to think about this and try to figure out, how do we fix all these problems, right? So I don't know if they're going about it the right way, though.
It seems like the internet has been hard on Rupert Murdoch and other newspaper barons. And they blame the internet for the loss of revenue in classified ads, right? Mm-hmm. They blame the internet for the loss of revenue in display ads. So their attitude is, well, they need to give us money. Do you think it's different though for online sites like The Information or Semaphore? Or they are there more
Semaphore? I mean, The Information and Semaphore are very different. I mean, The Information is just like, okay, we're gonna. I think The Information. I mean, it's the most pure.
I can't get to The Information, right? If I don't subscribe. I can see
right.
the link.
And so,
but you're probably not going to get a lot of share. Did you? I mean, I don't know. But
well, no, that's the problem, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that is the problem. Like, I worked for The Information. I loved it. But we'd have these big stories, and then people could sort of rip you off and not credit you because you are behind this paywall. And at the time when I started there, 2015, I mean, people thought paywalls were insane, and then it became all the rage. Now it's kind of like we're in this sort of weird sort of in between area right now with newsletters and all that stuff. But the Semaphore's business model is kind of in between. It's not a clickbait social media business model. It's more of a newsletter premium advertising model. So we're sort of in between The Information and whatever, some name any big online publication.
Right.
But back to like the advent of the internet and the classified ads. I mean, newspapers could have just said we're going to charge people for our news. For some reason, in the 90s and early 2000s, newspapers decided people are willing to pay. They pay us to deliver this thing to their doorstep every day. But now let's just offer it for free online, which is in hindsight kind of insane. And I mean, I think that was the original sin, really, as somebody who works in the business.
And I will say I pay $400 a year for The Information, and it's well worth it for me. But I'm in the news business. I pay for Bloomberg too, which is hurts my heart, but I do because I need that's part of my job. But also, I'm very reluctant to share links from any of those paywall services because I don't pay for Financial Times, and I just intentionally ignore everything they say because I can't get in there.
I think the idea of gift links, which has come up, I've seen them at both the New York Times and the Washington Post, where the idea is that you can gift a story as a subscriber. Mm-hmm. I think that's a great idea because, well, it's great in the sense that I read this cool thing. I want you to read it from a news. It's also really great from a data gathering perspective because if you think that someone on the back end is not tracking which articles get gifted most often, how many of those gifted articles lead to upsell or further engagement, like that's just a great data pool to act on. But I agree with Reed that this points to bigger funding and profit model problems within journalism and within publications as a whole. And part of it is journalism is not considered a public utility or a civic utility. We don't live in a country where it has a lot of government funding. For example, Germany has publicly funded, government-funded journalism as part and parcel of their culture and the way they do things. We don't. And building traffic sometimes is the only way people, and also I'm sure we all know people who the only way they consume news is if someone else spoon feeds it to them. Hey, did you see this? Hey, did you know about this? Like your mom used to send you clippings. Now your mom puts them on Facebook. And it's foolish not to try to build that audience, but I question why you would need to monetize it when there are probably other ways that are more reliable to make money than shaking down either Facebook as a distribution model or shaking down publications, which would absolutely take small or scantily funded publications out of the running and cause us to lose those contributions.
I do. I mean, I worry about Semaphore because I really like Semaphore, and I'm sure the Smiths know what they're doing. But I remember what was the? Now I've already forgotten the name of it. The Politico had a similar news operation, Protocol, right?
Yeah.
Which has folded, and I do worry that if you don't have a paywall and you don't have a robust advertising business, I'm not sure how you succeed. I guess the Smiths know what they're doing.
Protocol, if you remember, laid off, I think, like most of their employees after the first couple of weeks. So we're doing better than that. At least.
Good. Congratulations.
I think they also didn't have, they didn't have the. This is just from talking to people, friends who worked there. But they didn't build up the business model, side of the operation from the beginning. And I think Semaphore, it's really well thought out, and there's great people.
Ben and Justin have a lot of experience in this area, and they know what they're doing, I think. And you
totally. I think it's very different.
Team and yeah.
I mean, obviously, I'm talking my book as they say. But I think there's an interesting technology question in journalism, which is like, how do you rebuild what we've sort of missed now, which is like these institutions, especially in smaller towns where, like not the big cities that have the San Francisco Chronicle and those kinds of papers, but like, how do you rebuild those community hubs of great journalism that covered, like, didn't just cover City Hall and do investigative pieces on corruption and stuff like that, but they covered the high school sports and the local businesses and all that. I mean, I know that's not a technology question per se, but, in a way it is, because, it's not easy enough for local journalists who maybe are older, don't have the technological know-how to start their own subscription services. Like, it's not very easy for them to do. And that's kind of what I'd like to see from the tech industry, is like more thought about that. I mean, it's not going to be
You don't think Substack and Medium and places like that are sufficient? There needs to be.
So I think
that's how Substack started. Sorry.
No, go ahead, finish, Reed, and then Lisa.
No, I think that was the dream of Substack, and it's kind of gone in this different direction. That's all I was going to say. I didn't mean to interrupt.
They've gone for the big high dollar bylines, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, we love it. We love Substack, right? It's just not. It's not exactly that, right?
It's not going to help the journalist on the street, the guy and gal covering the city council meetings.
Well, wasn't that the dream of Patch for a while?
Patch, I still read Patch. Patch exists, doesn't it?
I still think one of the biggest missed opportunities of the Audis was the Gothamist empire, because you had Gothamist and LAist and Seattleist and SFist and Austinist and DCist and Chicagoist.
Why did that fail?
Well, what I think should have happened, again, missed opportunity, is they really should have just spun off and sold the different city verticals to different newspapers. And
but the newspapers are history.
Or they could have sold them to. It's been interesting. LAist is now with KCRW, I think, a local. Oh. And I know that Chicagoist was recently revived. But it was from what I'm saying is, from the newspaper perspective, they really should have jumped on the IST blogs and the Audis, because you had in those blogs, and full disclosure, I wrote for LAist and for SFist. You had really smart, engaged staffs that were hyper local and building out a phenomenal amount of coverage. And it would have been great for the San Francisco Chronicle or the LA Times to be like, okay, we're just going to lift you and shift you. You're not going to threaten newsroom operations. You'll still have your Metro reporters, but we want you to keep working on that community building and that local feel, where you are talking about nonprofits that are doing dog adoption drives every Friday, or you are talking about the taqueria that just launched.
Hey, I'm Rod Pyle, editor-in-chief of Ad Astra Magazine, and each week I join with my co-host to bring you This Week in Space, the latest and greatest news from the final frontier. We talk to NASA chiefs, space scientists, engineers, educators, and artists, and sometimes we just shoot the breeze over what's hot and what's not in space, books, and TV. And we do it all for you, our fellow true believers. So whether you're an armchair adventurer or waiting for your turn to grab a slot in Elon's Mars rocket, join us on This Week in Space and be part of the greatest adventure of all time.